Yes, you read the title correctly. Back then, computers had a turbo button on the case. Now, this is just a cool nostalgic button you press for… what? To be a scam button? Well, let's check that here. For that, let's turn back the clock to 1981, when the first IBM PC was released. It had an Intel 8088 processor running at 4.77 MHz, either with an MDA or CGA graphics card, and ran on MS-DOS. I wish I had an IBM PC like that here to show you in more detail, but this high-screen model of computer here will have to do it. Well, this is a slightly newer model with an Intel 286 chip clocked at 16 MHz. And here we see it, the turbo button with its matching display, which also shows the megahertz. And yes, there were models that had a display or just a button with a matching LED to indicate which mode you were in. Like my homemade 486 PC here, unfortunately it doesn't have a display, but it does have a turbo button. And there's a gap of about 6 years between these two PCs, since I couldn't find exact release dates for the high screen, but the 286 chip was released in 1982. Between the 286 and the 486 there were also a 386. However, unlike today's processors, which are grouped together and indicate the speed classes, these represent different generations. Here's the CPU from the IBM PC. The 8088 from 1981 running at 4.77 MHz was replaced a year later by a more powerful 286 starting at 8 MHz, doubling the performance. 3 years later, the 386 arrived, starting at 12 MHz and with a 32-bit processor, almost twice as fast as before. And 4 years later, the 486 was introduced, starting at 16 MHz, which again boosted performance with a built-in coprocessor, a feature that had previously been optional. So from 1981 to 89, hardware evolved very rapidly and software had to keep up. Did it? Yeah, back then in the computer world of 1980 and 82, people assumed that a computer was simply the way it was, with a fixed clock speed and everything. So in other words, a Commodore 64 was exactly as it was. It would never get any performance improvements or any improvement of the graphics chip inside it. Well, and that's why many of the applications were written to take advantage of what was available at the time. To put it simply, people assumed that the PC had a clock speed of 4.77 MHz and it wasn't going to get any faster than that. Yeah, if only we'd know what to expect from today. If we were to run Program X on a new computer, like this 486 PC here, it would just run way too fast on it. Games were affected too. They ran way too fast and were unplayable. Timings were set based on processor clock speed, and if the CPU was twice as fast, the application would also run twice as fast. What did you have to do? Lower the clock speed so that everything would run at a more manageable speed. But you've got to be able to activate this mode somehow, right? A button on the case would be handy, alongside with a display showing the CPU's clock speed. But marketing does worry about that we can't have a button that says slow mode. Who's going to buy something like that? Well, I imagine that was the conversation among the PC manufacturers, because a turbo button was easier to market. To summarize once again, the turbo button wasn't there for speeding up your PC. It was there to slow it down. That kind of thing was easier to market, but it's also confusing that this mode is called like that. There were even manufacturers who designed it so that the turbo button was actually made to speed up everything, but only a few manufacturers. Reportedly, the turbo button was introduced on the IBM PC XT, the successor of the first IBM PC, to throttle its CPU from 6 MHz to 4.77 MHz. So that's how every turbo button worked. It made the PC about half as fast. That effectively eliminated the issue of older programs or games running too fast and not function properly. That is until the Intel 386 was released in 1985, as it was significantly faster even in slow mode, which once again highlights the problem of the older applications running too fast. So software manufacturers were encouraged to adapt their software to the speeds of the new processors. Either the programs were artificially slowed down using software throttling, or, as in the case of today, they were synchronized with the real-time clock of the PC. Starting with the first Intel Pentium processors in 1993, the turbo button was technically no longer necessary, since there were simply no any reason to lower the clock speed. Later with the Pentium 3 and its speed step technology, the clock frequency could be adjusted as needed. Well, starting with the Pentium 1, the focus shifted more toward running Windows, and old DOS programs could still be run up until Windows Me. With DOS, this was more for older games that were supposed to remain compatible with Windows, which is why the business version of Windows do not run on the DOS kernel. Well, but we're kind of get a little bit off topic here, so those turbo buttons were just a thing on really old computers from around 82 to 85, right? No. The turbo button was around until 1995. And why? Well, this feature was just kept around for marketing purposes. Customers figured that anything without a turbo button must be slow. Whether a computer with a turbo button could also go fast. But no one stopped to think about that this turbo button slowed things down and not actually speed up things. My Intel 486 PC here still has a turbo button like that, and even though I've wired it up, I've never actually used it. Over the years, turbo mode just faded away, to the point where it was almost never seen anymore. Until 2016, where there was a brief revival of the turbo button, which actually did what it said, it speeded things up. But benchmarks have shown that this is just marketing again. Such systems didn't run any faster at all. In today's world, a turbo button like that has really become unnecessary. All of the CPUs out there adapt to the situation, what is needed at the moment. In other words, when the computer isn't doing anything, the clock speed is low. And when performance is needed, it clocks up and boosts itself. And another big boost would be to give this channel a subscribe here. And then I think that's everything that I can say, and we'll see us.